I would disclose anything, but I won't disclose that and other things that get sellers in trouble. This is the real story with Adam and Sherry. I'm Adam Hamalian,
And I'm Sherry Hutchens.
and this is where we talk about all things real estate, mainly for our clients, some for our colleagues, and really because we just like hanging out with each other.
Yep. So, Adam, we are nearing the middle of June. What do you think's going on with the market right now?
Yeah, this is an interesting time, just kind of in the arc of market conditions, and it's post Memorial Day, and there's always just kind of a little lull as school gets out and people are anxious to get out of town for early summer holidays, and next year's school year seems far away. So there hasn't been a lot of inventory, so continuing that trend, and homes are sitting on the market a little bit longer. But today we
Yep.
got some good news.
Yeah.
Looks
What was
like
that?
yeah, it looks like inflation has been kept in check. It's dramatically lower than where we were a year ago. So
Good.
people are feeling those in the know seem to be encouraged by that. The futures on the stock market this morning went straight up on the news, and so I think we might get a interest rate cut this year after all, and maybe even more than one, which we were originally promised three. That's not happening. Uh,
No.
but it looks like we'll get one and maybe even two, depending upon the next 3 to 6 months. But the past performance is never, or whatever that phrase is, past performance, not the promise of future performance or something like that. So
Something like that.
yeah, we'll wait and see.
All right, good. Well, I know people have been waiting for those interest rate cuts, but it's probably, I mean, I think it's a good time to buy anyway because we're starting to see price reductions and jump in, people. Call
Yeah,
us. We'll take you out to look at houses.
yeah, exactly. I mean, it's got to be the right house for the right people, and
Yep.
sellers and buyers got to come to the meeting of the minds on the sales price. But um, with the promise of interest rates possibly going down, buying now and then refinancing with at a lower rate in the future can make things very affordable. But it's got to work in today's dollars, just in
Yep.
case interest rates don't go down. So you should never buy with assuming that that's what's going to happen as a guarantee.
Well, and if we're putting on our entirely buyer's hat at this point, it's good news that we actually put someone into contract about a week and a half ago for under list price. That
That's
hasn't
right.
happened in a long time.
No, it hasn't. And it's a cute little house. She wants to do some things to make it her own, but it's
Yep,
move-in ready if she wanted to,
absolutely. And a
which
lot of
is,
square footage for the price.
I think the key is having a house, if you're listing it, that it's somebody that can move into it. Because if they're paying, a high interest rate, they may not want to unload cash. They might want to hold that in reserve or borrow as little as possible.
hmm
So making a house so that it's ready for someone to move into would be great.
Yep, that's what we
Yeah.
always say when we're wearing our listing
Well,
agent hat.
yeah, that's
So,
right. We had kind of a nice closing this last week where we represented
yeah.
the seller,
Mhm.
and there are um, the numerous fruit trees at this house, and the buyer isn't quite ready to move in yet. And they made a very generous offer to the seller and said, "Hey, if you'd like to come continue to pick fruit over the next few weeks before we move in, rather than give it up to the squirrels, come
Yep.
over and do that."
Oh, I thought that was just the most amazing thing. Is there anything better in this job than when we put really lovely, nice sellers together with the same kind of buyers?
It can be such a contagious event because it's high anxiety and lots of
Yep.
money and everything else. And so when they come through the end where everybody performs like they promised to do and
Yep.
nobody's offered more than what they couldn't do and
Yep.
they're happy at the end, it makes it so that that handoff can be really a memorable one for everybody in a positive way.
Yeah, because earlier this year we had one close where the seller refused to come to the walkthrough, just
Yeah,
adamantly said, I'm not coming. And
yeah,
that was not the same kind of closing as this one was. So
yeah.
it warms your heart
It
when
does. It's
something like
nice when
that
that
happens.
happens. We want people when they buy a house to have the warm and fuzzies about the beginning when they're going to make their home there, and it's
Yep.
we try to make that happen as much as possible.
Yep. Yep. One of our whys for sure.
Actually, so those squirrels eating the fruit is a little bit of an intro to our topic this week.
Yes, it is. Tell
We're
us more
gonna
about that.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about disclosures, and our teaser was parody of Meatloaf. not a parody, is a paraphrase of Meatloaf. I would
Uh-huh.
disclose anything, but I won't disclose that. Um,
Can't wait to
California's,
see the video,
I
Hugh.
know, right? California is kind of a unique state in the union. I don't know all state laws, but we have some fairly strong consumer protection laws in California, which include
Yes.
that if you're selling a home, you're required to disclose anything that might be a material fact about it when you sell it.
Yep.
And in some places, I think I told you I was helping a family member and they were purchasing a property in Georgia. And the only disclosure they got was the mandatory federal disclosure about lead paint because it had been built before 1978.
Which is amazing. I mean, when
And
you see the stack of paperwork that we go through with our clients when we review disclosures, to think that there was one piece of paper.
yeah,
One.
it was kind of ridiculous. And
Yeah.
so I heard another story. We have a couple past clients that are from Utah, and actually our photographers from Utah. And so we've gotten
Mhm.
discussing about real estate there. They
Yep.
have non-disclosure laws there also. And I heard about this story about a valley that floods like every year, or every, fairly often. And this person moved from out of state, bought a home, and the seller didn't have to disclose about this massive flood that comes through the area periodically. And so that first year, the house flooded, and they're like, "What the hey? How come nobody told us that?" It's like everybody here just knew it, and I wasn't required to tell you. So, um, their
Well,
agent didn't need to tell them. The seller didn't need to tell them. That was on them.
why didn't their agent have to tell them? Because as you know, not only do our sellers have disclosure duties by law in California, but we have disclosure duties. And why didn't their agent tell them about the flooding? That doesn't make any sense to me.
I might not have the story right, but it
Yeah.
was kind of just shocking. And I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's standard everywhere.
Yeah.
So, well, not
Disclose,
everywhere, standard in
disclose,
Utah.
disclose.
Yeah.
We always say disclose, 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 or your neighbor will do it for you.
Yeah.
And
So,
they do.
yeah, yes, they do.
Yeah.
There are, so, when a property is sold, it can be, most homes in California are sold through a licensed realtor who is a member of the California Association of Realtors.
Yep.
Um, the properties can change hand other ways also, and they can use lawyers or, depending upon if there's people owed like a bank or something else, it can be done on the back of a napkin. Quite honestly, the recording at the county obviously needs to not be on the back of a napkin,
Hopefully
but
not.
obviously we are licensed real estate agents, and we are members separate. We're not only are we licensed real estate agents, we are also members of the California Association of Realtors, which gives us access to some legal documents
Mhm.
that we use on all of our transactions. And
Yep.
because of our association with the CAR, it's required that we use a couple forms and that our clients use a couple forms as
Yes.
part of their disclosures.
Yes.
And so there's two primary forms that sellers use to communicate anything that might be material about the property. One of them is the Seller Property Questionnaire, and this leans towards a description of the house that's being sold,
Mhm.
but it does have disclosure information on it. And the Real Estate Transfer Disclosure Statement, or TDS,
Mhm.
Disclosure Transaction Statement. Is that what the T
For
stands?
TDS, transfer disclosure statement.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
And this is also what's being sold, but then goes into more detail about, are there any deficiencies in any of the things that are there? Are you
Or
aware of?
anything that's not working.
Yes, all of that.
Little bit of
Eh,
trivia. I don't know if you know this. Well, of course you know this. You're a licensed real estate broker, but the TDS is tied directly to a lawsuit that happened with someone in Diablo who I worked with for at one point. It's Sotheby's, and he worked at Dudum for a little bit. He was involved in that lawsuit, and the result of that lawsuit, in many ways, was agency disclosure and the real estate transfer disclosure statement, and it changed the way agent buyers and sellers are represented in California.
And to defend that agent a little bit, it was a past something that had happened in the past that what before he was involved with the property that didn't get
Yes.
disclosed.
Yeah, it was not his fault.
Yeah, he just happened to be part of the lawsuit.
Yeah, the seller
Um,
did not disclose.
yeah,
And then everybody got, roped into that lawsuit. So
yeah, yes. The
And the neighbor really did come over and say, "Oh, so you didn't know about this? Well, it happened X number of years ago." Thank you,
Yeah,
neighbors.
yeah.
Anyway,
So
I interrupted. Go ahead.
no, no. So one of the ways that we frame this question with our clients is when they ask, "What do I have to disclose?" And Sherry, how would you answer that question if a seller's like, "Do I need to say that? Do I need to say that there's dead rodents under the house, or do I need to say that we repainted that bathroom?" Uh,
Mhm,
how do you help sellers answer that
mhm.
question?
Anything that is a material fact that could change the mind of the buyer about whether or not they want to purchase the house. That is a disclosure. So let's see, does the buyer, sorry, need to know that before you painted the house, the middle bedroom blue, it was painted pink? Do they need to know that would affect their opinion of value of that home? Probably not. That you have a massive rodent infestation living in the crawl space of your house and you got a quote for $25,000 to take care of it. Do they need to know that? That affect whether or not they want to buy that house? That's a disclosure.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yep.
it's interesting. We helped a seller here a couple of years ago that did have some issues with rodents, and he parsed the language that we were using as we were just talking about it.
Mhm.
And I can't remember, did we say it was a rodent problem or a rodent issue or a rodent infestation? Whatever the word was, he wanted to change it to use a different word.
Well, I called it an infestation and he said it wasn't an infestation. And then I changed infestation to problem and he said it wasn't a problem. And then I changed it to a rodent issue and he was okay with that.
Yeah.
So it
I
was an infestation.
yeah. Well, I think that when it comes to subjective words, that's part of our challenge, right? And
Yeah.
what are the right descriptors that we use to describe it? And, you were talking about a question about whether a buyer, will it bother the buyer or not? Is there a dictionary someplace that says buyers will be bothered by this and they won't be bothered by that? How is that determined that it's troublesome to a buyer?
Well, I think it depends on the buyer. If
Yeah,
it was me, I would not buy a house that had a rodent issue or a problem or an infestation. Other buyers might think, oh, I've got traps. I can take care of that problem. It depends on the buyer.
yeah,
And I guess to a certain degree, when we're filling out our agent disclosure, we're not allowed to, or we're not supposed to use adjectives. And maybe assigning a word like infestation or problem to a situation is not correct either. Maybe it's more that you just say there are rodents under the house and
yeah,
let the buyer determine whether it's an infestation or a problem.
yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And I think that, part of the answer here is it's troublesome to the buyer if the buyer feels it's troublesome. And
Yep. Yep.
that's a moving target for different buyers. And so it's important that sellers disclose anything that might be material, even if they're like, well, that didn't bother me. It didn't bother you, but it might bother future buyer. And
Yeah.
6 months from now, when they discover it, will they want to come back and ask for some remedy
Yep.
because we didn't fully disclose something, whether it's rodents or some other issue that we may not be aware
Mhm.
of.
And it can be linked to, are they going to have to spend money somewhere down the road when they discover a rodent issue in the crawl space, and how much money is it going to cost them to eradicate the rodents? Or a roof that leaks that they didn't know about, and all of a sudden they're shelling out $40,000 for a roof. But it can also be a link to livability. I think that I had a house where the buyers bought with another agent and the seller did not disclose there was a halfway house next door. Now, there's no amount of money in the world that could change that situation, but it affected the livability. And had they known that that was the case, they wouldn't have bought that house. But nobody told them till they pulled up in front of the house with the moving truck, and the neighbor came across the street literally as they were opening the back of the truck and told them.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, money and livability and what else would be an issue for, things that they didn't know about.
One of the not one of the first house that my wife and I bought was in Dixon, and Dixon is a train stop. I mean,
Hmm.
it's in the farming community almost all the way to Davis before you get to Sacramento, and a train literally cuts the town in half. And
Wow.
during the day, currently there's not much daytime traffic. A commuter train comes by a couple times a day, but it's not. They're usually pretty short. And the seller didn't disclose to us that there was a regular 3 a.m. train that came through, and it was a freight train. And they do the freight trains at night because they're very long, and there's only one track that goes on that section. So if there's two tracks, they can move commuter trains over one side and freight on the other.
Hmm.
And it was a little disheartening in the first night we were there. We were probably a quarter mile from the train tracks. So,
Hmm.
not right next door, but close enough. And boy, when that train came through that first night, it was, you're laying in bed. We were already kind of like, what do we do? We just bought a house. We have a mortgage now. What's going on? We were kind of freaking out already. And then to have the train come through was just like almost pushed us over the top. Like that
Oh, I
needed to be
bet.
disclosed. And it's like it was one of those things where it wouldn't have made a difference. We had to live in Dixon because of work, so we
Yeah.
we weren't going to get away from the train if we bought another house. So it wasn't there wasn't anything to do about it. But the truth was, by the time we sold that house, that train was a point of comfort, uh,
Oh, interesting.
because we were living there over 9/11, and of course
Oh,
everything stopped. Right, all
yeah.
the everything that was normal wasn't normal again.
Yeah.
So when that train resumed, it was kind of this signal of things getting back to normal.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I
It
and even
does.
by that time, but especially after that, the rhythmic clicking of the train going over the tracks, just that regular beat was not quite white noise. It was a little bit louder than that, but it was like white noise. And
Yeah.
and especially after post 9/11, it was almost
Comfort.
comfort. Yeah.
Comforting. Yeah.
But those are the kinds of
Interesting.
yeah, those are the kind of things that show up on disclosure statements that you don't notice when you're walking through a house.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
for sellers, it's really important to include some of the things that are standard, or like oftentimes people will paint a house before they sell it. Well, you're going to patch any cracks that are there. It's important to disclose, hey, we patched a crack here.
Yeah.
We patched a crack there. Because in California, those cracks often are seasonal because of our expansive soil, and that they're not really um, a problem as far as like a foundation issue that can be repaired. It's just the way
Mhm.
the house breathes.
For our
Um,
listeners that are out of state, do you want to explain what a seasonal crack is in California?
yeah, so a lot of the soil in Northern California is clay, and clay is a highly expansive soil. So when it gets wet in the winter, it expands and actually will slightly lift the house up and move it slightly. And then in the
Mhm.
summer, when it's hot and dry, the soil contracts as it dries out, and the house settles back down. And so it's almost like you can imagine breathing and contracting like this,
Yep.
and something's got to give because the sheetrock isn't flexible like my chest is. And so those cracks, when the house heaves, um,
Yeah.
cracks will open up, and usually they'll happen on
Yep.
seams in the sheetrock. So there's usually a straight line vertically or horizontally, usually vertically. um,
Yep.
and if they're diagonal cracks, those are often indicative that the house is settling in a different rate. And so you want to pay attention to those. Those need to be disclosed also. But yeah, seasonal cracks.
Also, for our out of area listeners, we don't have any rain from usually end of March, beginning of April until November, sometimes
Y-
December. So
yes,
that's why the soil dries out.
yes, I should have included that. And all of you
Yeah.
think that the Golden State is about the actual gold found in the ground. No, it's actually the brown hills when everything dries up about the end of May, all through the summer until November when it rains again.
And
It's
then we have beautiful green hills in the winter.
for a few minutes. Yeah. Sure.
Yes.
What are some other disclosures? What about the disclosure about the fruit trees over on our last listing?
You mean the squirrels
Yes.
that were trying to get to the fruit before the owners got to the
Yeah.
fruit?
Uh-huh. So
Yeah.
these forms often don't hold enough space for a full description of disclosures. And so there's often
Right.
a text override, or people will just write pages maybe a page, or in this case, several pages of
Yeah,
important information. It was actually one of the most amazing disclosures, but this particular one was,
it was 10 pages long.
yeah,
It set a record.
yeah. And tell them about the squirrels.
So they decided to conduct war on these squirrels who were eating the fruit off the 17 fruit trees in the backyard, and they embarked on an aggressive campaign of killing them. They were trapping them and killing them. I think initially they were taking them off and letting them out of the cage somewhere else. And you know what they were doing? They were just running right back to the house before probably before the sellers even got home. And eventually they started killing them. But our seller is, Mrs. Seller is a former pastor, and she's telling me the story about we were killing like 3 a day. And she paused and said, Except on the Sabbath, we let them have the Sabbath off. We didn't kill any squirrels on the Sabbath."
Well, and so we were discussing this with our risk management broker about as a disclosure. Should we include that in our agent disclosure as well? And he asked, did
Because
they
he
do
killed
any?
100 squirrels, they thought, one
Yeah, they
year.
thought maybe 100 squirrels. And our risk management person said, well, did they do anything with the pelts? And I said, I don't think so. Because what a shame, what a waste.
Yeah,
I would just
seems like a waste.
That's right. Seems like a waste. Yeah. I was envisioning Mr. Seller and Mrs. Seller with these Daniel Boone hats
Uh-huh.
with with with,
And
with
coats.
with a gray squirrel tail in the back,
Uh-huh. Yes.
singing that old camp song. So
Oh my gosh. Well, didn't your brother kill some squirrels for a while?
yeah, he had a garden also. This is in Georgia,
Yeah.
and they were trying to keep the squirrels out of their tomatoes. I mean, he had
Yeah.
an amazing garden, and so they were shooting the squirrels with BB guns. And um, my nephew may have tried to cook one time.
Oh
I,
my
I
goodness.
I don't think that went over. I think that the adults said we're not getting any bubonic plague into us that way. And so they were kind of trying to figure out what to do with them. And they're talking with a neighbor, and the neighbor said, "Just leave them alone. The wild animals, the hawks and falcons and
Oh
foxes
my
will come
gosh.
eat them." And like, sure enough, they would shoot it, and it was always gone by the next day. So.
I
Uh,
think this is turning into the squirrel podcast instead of the disclosure podcast.
yeah, we definitely talked about rodents way too much.
Yeah, well, I'm worried now that I have actually have some tomatoes growing in my yard that I'm going to be fighting the squirrels soon. So we shall see.
Uh,
So,
well, so all of you listening, there's been occasional times when I've had Sherry on a Zoom call like this where we're just talking with each other, and she will turn to look out over her right shoulder and yell, "Get out of my garden!" at the top of her lungs. And I could just picture the squirrels climbing up into her pots, eating, pulling the
eating my
immature,
succulents.
yeah, and digging up and eating the immature lemons and
And
anything.
don't forget me banging on the sliding glass
Yeah,
door, and
banging
they
on the
just look
sliding
at me
glass.
like, "Oh, her again."
That's right. Yeah, crazy woman inside. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly.
Mm,
One of the things about disclosures, I mean, we love the client who did a 10-page disclosure addendum to the 7 pages that are required. He's an engineer, so of course he would be very thorough and detailed, but disclosures make sellers nervous because they think they're going to tell a buyer something about the house that it'll keep them from buying it. But what happens if they don't disclose something? And somebody buys a house and finds out about it later.
yeah. So withholding information or hiding any information that might be material can be really problematic because after the close of escrow, if it's before the close of escrow, there can be a meeting of the minds on how to solve it. But if it's after the close of escrow, it can become quite expensive litigation.
Yeah,
Um, and people have had to buy houses back at the most severe side of it.
yeah,
Sometimes it is just a monetary, here's, $500 to fix that thing. And sometimes it's 25,000. It's all a variety. But if you disclose it up front and it's not a big deal, the person's going to buy the house and everything proceeds. If you don't disclose it and it's a big deal and they find out about it later, now you have a huge lawsuit and
yeah.
there's no way to go back and undo it. So the law is you have to disclose anything that's material, and the buyer is really the one that decides what's materials. And if you have to ask if you should disclose it, the answer is usually yes.
Always
Some,
yes.
Sometimes we're like, no, you don't need to disclose that your kid fell down the stairs 10 years ago. That's not material, but
Right.
um,
That would not keep anybody from buying the house.
no, yeah. So, but we can help guide you. But typically, you're going to hear from us. If in doubt, disclose. And it can be there's a lot of information about helping you disclose it. I mean, obviously, your agent or us will help you be thorough, but there's a disclosure that talks about we're disclosing to you how to fill out the disclosures, and there's some guidelines, so you're not on your own. But the default answer is always it's better to be transparent and have it built into the price and just accept the reality. So
Yep, yep. Because if that person has a problem with something you've disclosed, they can go on to the next house and somebody else will come in and they probably won't have a problem with it.
yeah.
Every house sells eventually, especially in California. So I don't know if you remember this. I had a house over on Warren where during a heavy rainstorm one winter, part of the deck and part of the pool had dropped 125 feet down into Las Trampas Creek. Do you remember that house?
Oh, I remember that
I do
house.
know you remember that house. And it was a short sale. I tried to do a short sale on it, got 3 offers and submitted it to the bank for approval, along with a quote for $800,000 to secure that, to repair the damage to the deck, the house, and the pool, and to secure that 125-foot drop into the creek. And they turned it down. And so the buyer or the seller walked away and said, go ahead and disclose or foreclose on it. And so they did. Well, they sold it at auction to somebody and they didn't disclose about that $800,000 foundation repair. And lo and behold, that agent who represented the buyer at the auction called me and said, do you have any buyers? And I said, well, if I did, I would have sold it, but nobody wanted to deal with that $800,000 foundation repair. And he was like, what? And he went to court and he got that foreclosure or that purchase at foreclosure reversed
Yeah.
because the bank had withheld that information.
Yeah. Even if you've gotten a bid to do work, even if you didn't do the work, you have to disclose that bid
Yep.
because it helps buyers understand the significance of something. Well,
Yep.
so to follow up on that for everyone who's watching, Sherry's part of the
No.
story. Sherry's part of the story happened before I joined our current brokerage.
Mhm.
And I
Oh
had
no.
some clients who they were just beginning their search. They had a really limited budget. And they're like, why is this house so inexpensive? And I'm like, well, it's because it's not in very good condition. But we said, well, let's just go look at it. I was, I had some extra time, less busy in those days.
This was
And we,
long after I had it on the market and
couple
after the
years, yeah.
foreclosure and the reversal and everything.
So I went to go look at it, showed it, and there's a couple things I'm not going to repeat here on the podcast it had further gone downhill after Sherry had not been in control of the property.
Uh-huh.
And so
Yep.
I came back to the office and I think I was making small talk with somebody that came to our door. Sherry and I were sharing an office. We weren't partners yet. Somebody had come to the door, our office door, and we were making small talk. And I was like, oh, you won't believe this house I just saw. It was this and that, and it was falling off the hill. And Sherry goes, that's my listing. I mean, it wasn't her current listing, but it was like, you're describing my
That
house.
was my listing.
She still felt personally responsible for the house. And I was talking poorly about
Oh,
it. And I was like,
yeah.
it wasn't, I was only telling the truth that half the backyard was in the creek down 100
Yes.
feet down below. It was
We
not
will let the
good.
listeners imagine what had happened to that house when it had been vacant for 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah. There were maybe some people squatting in it for a period of time. So,
Uh-huh. Literally.
yeah. Well, I
Anyway.
think that is probably about as much time as we got this week. Talking about disclosures. We
Yep.
hope that we haven't scared our sellers off about what they have to disclose. And for buyers, just know you got to ask some good questions, even when you look at those reports. And
Yep.
sometimes sellers will say something like, it's a minor crack, and minor crack is not minor at all.
Relative.
Yeah, it's
Mhm.
all relative. So it's good news. We want buyers to have a clear picture of what they're buying and sellers to be as transparent as possible so that, like what we started with the buyer and seller having that happy story about the fruit trees, that they, if everybody's transparent and can come to the table honestly and openly, we get to that place at the end.
Yep. Yep.
Any final thoughts, Sherry?
Disclose, 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 or your neighbors will do it for you.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us for this week for the Real Story. If you liked our content, be sure to like the podcast and subscribe and share it with your friends and family. And stay tuned next week for our next episode. Bye,
Yep.
everybody.
Bye, everybody.